Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, and maybe I should say to myself, welcome back to my channel. I've been away for a little bit. My schooling has been kicking my butt. Had some family things going on. But here, back again to talk about books, which is, I have missed that and look forward to this year as I just about finish up my schooling to really have more time to devote to just talking about books and what I'm reading and what I'm loving. So I want to take today to talk about my 10 favorite books from 2021, as so many are doing right now. Just want to share with you the 10 books that I enjoyed most. Because I'm so backtracked on reading, most of these are books that have been out for a while, but I'm just now finally reading them, but I guess better late than never. So let me just say quickly that in 2021 was my record year for reading. I read 84 books in 2021, so I'm really excited about that. Only 46% of those books were fiction. So compared to where I've been at in the past, that is still a huge improvement from where I've been before. So on to the top 10. But before I do that, I do want to take a second and just give two shout outs for honorable mentions. And the two honorable mentions, first of all, is a book called Hero of the Fallen by Wes Sherry, and then All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody. And those were, I put them as honorable mentions because, not necessarily that they're 11 and 12, but they were two surprise reads of the year. Two books that I knew nothing about heading into them, but thoroughly enjoyed both of those. So those received my honorable mentions. So with that, on to the top 10 books that I read in 2021. First of all, coming in at number 10 is Bird Box by Josh Mallorman. And I love this book. It's a fairly quick read. The one drawback I had was watching the movie on Netflix before I knew it was a book and before I read this book. So some of the suspense was taken out from me, for me, in that I kind of knew generally what was going to happen. So that did diminish the reading experience a little bit. But as a whole, just putting my experience of watching the movie for a first time along with this, love that post-apocalyptic feel, that survival feel, the mystery behind the creatures, the beings that are out there. So enjoy this one from beginning to end and put this at my number 10 read for the year. I also read the sequel, Mallory, which was also good, not as good as Bird Box, and obviously not making it into my top 10. Or is it? Ooh, did I just spoil anything? I don't know. Anyway, number 9 on the year was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And you can see here the little Netflix sticker saying it's the inspiration for the Netflix series. And that's because if you haven't read the book and the TV show are nothing at all alike. This is a great old-fashioned haunted house book. A great haunted house book where the house is just as much a character as any of the others. So what we have in The Haunting of Hill House very quickly is a small group of people headed up by a paranormal researcher trying to explore paranormal activity in Hill House and seeing what they find and all of the things that ensue in their time at Hill House. So really enjoyed this book. I think it's a classic horror book for a reason. So The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson comes in for me at number 9. Number 8 is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Listen to that on audiobook. I don't have the physical copy. That the inspiration for now a Amazon series with Michael Sheen and David Tennant. I loved Good Omens. It was probably the first time I laughed out loud at a book, and I did so on multiple occasions. Just the little references, the little statements that are thrown in there that are just fantastic. And if you're not familiar with Good Omens, we have an angel and a demon who have been on Earth since the beginning, and they've become quite accustomed to living on Earth, and they've kind of become frenemies over the years. And all of a sudden, it is time now for the apocalypse, and the Antichrist is born. But the angel and the demon don't really want the apocalypse to happen because they want to continue living on planet Earth. And so they try to see if they can subtly not let the apocalypse happen. And so just a delightful story filled with lots of laughs and some heart as well. So highly recommend Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Number 7 is a book that I do have the copy of, but my wife borrowed it, and I don't know where it is at the moment. So there's a little bit of panic and anxiety in me. My collection's missing a book. But the book, and I'm going to butcher this name because I've heard different people say it so many different ways, but the book is called A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. This is the closest I've come to crying at the end of a book. It's about this crotchety old man and his neighbors, and against his best efforts, ends up just caught up in this family feel with his neighbors, and he's trying to accomplish something, and these neighbors keep stopping that from happening. And just a beautiful story, and you really just, your heart just goes out to Ove, however his name is supposed to be said. Just a beautiful, beautiful story, and thoroughly enjoyed every second of that one. Now, number 6 on my list, and I actually didn't grab this hard copy. Wow, I'm just looking over at my stack, realizing that I dropped the ball on that one. Number 6 is Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, the sequel to The Shining. I actually read this before I read The Shining, but I saw The Shining movie years and years ago. After I read the book, I watched the Dr. Sleep movie. I know it kind of gets a little bit of hate. Some people are kind of about it, but I really enjoyed Dr. Sleep. I think it was a beautiful sequel to The Shining. I really liked the father-son dynamic and the family dynamic as it kind of brings, for me, a better conclusion to the story of The Shining. So Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, number 6, very, very good book. Excellent. And I love the Nosferatu reference that happens in there as well. So that brings me to the top 5 of my reads from 2021. And coming in at number 5 is a book that I initially wasn't drawn to because I'm drawn to horror. And this one is not horror. Sci-fi, a little bit because of the premise, but definitely not horror. But that is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This was amazing. Fantastic story, fantastic ending. The premise of it is our lead character goes to this little greasy spoon diner, and the owner of the diner happens to have a portal in the back of his diner that allows you to very specifically travel in time, in that it takes you back to the exact same spot in the late 1950s every time. And when you come back, it's like you've been gone for a second, but when you go back in time again, you go right back and you reset your time in the past. And so the diner owner has a theory that if the assassination of John F. Kennedy could be prevented, that would change all of history for the better. And so he has been working and his return trips back in time to go about figuring out what needs to happen to prevent Kennedy from being assassinated, and thus you don't have Vietnam and all of these other things that would happen so differently between then and the present time. And so that's it. He passes his mission on to this younger teacher, to fulfill that duty, and you see what happens by the ends. Great story. There is romance in there if you like some romance. There is really a strong love story in the middle of it, even in the midst of the Kennedy plot. So highly recommend this. So glad I picked that up, despite it not being horror. And for the record, I found that there's quite a few Stephen King books. I think whenever Stephen King writes a book, it's just labeled horror, even though there's a lot of his books that are not horror by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, that brings me to number 4 on my list of my favorite reads from 2021. And coming in at number 4 is The Shining by Stephen King. And this actually held a fairly high spot for me during the year. Really blown away by how much I liked this book. I was really expecting a lot more similarities to the movie. But then finding out that Stephen King didn't like the movie, and now seeing why. There's a very different emphasis, I think, in the book than there is in the movie. And I think one thing that the movie fails to do is bring out the father-son relationship between Jack and Danny that Stephen King just beautifully executes in the story. Because watching the movie, there's nothing about Jack Torrance that is likable, but as I read this, you begin to see why Danny is so obsessed with his father and so looks up to his father, which then makes the unfolding of the story that much more tragic, but at the same time beautiful. So outstanding. It's a classic Stephen King for a good reason. The Shining by Stephen King coming in at number 4. So that brings me to the top 3. And coming in at number 3, I saw some other booktubers who only gave an author one book in their top 10. Even if there were multiple that should have been in the top 10, they only allowed one book per author. Obviously, I didn't do that. We've already had a couple Stephen King, and guess what? Number 3, The Stand by Stephen King. Again, not horror, fantasy for sure, post-apocalyptic fantasy. But this was obviously, at the time, it was the biggest book I had read. And honestly, there's parts where in the middle you kind of begin to think, what have I gotten myself into? But this is so worth the journey. I didn't rush through it. I took my time and really kind of allowed the story to saturate. And I'm so glad I did, because you really begin to feel with each of the characters. I feel like each of the characters are fleshed out in a wonderful way. And there's definitely a growing sense of tension as the story moves on. Again, obviously, it's a very well-known Stephen King book, and once again, for good reason. So, The Stand by Stephen King comes in at my number 3 spot. Number 2, sorry, it's another Stephen King. And to date, my favorite Stephen King book. I didn't think it would be, but the more I process it and think about it, I put it as my favorite Stephen King, and it finds itself as my number 2 book of all of 2021, and that is It by Stephen King. 2 issues with the book. First of all, one of the biggest one is the scene, and if you've read it, you know what the scene is. Really could have done without that. In fact, I felt like there were spent a little bit too much time sexualizing, especially Beverly. I mean, she's 11 years old, dude. But I get it where when the Losers Club are children, the story's being written as these friends are seeing each other, and so for the boys, they're going to be obsessed with Beverly. So I get that, but the scene really wasn't necessary at all. The second issue I have, and again, this was written by early 80s or whatever, very different time, the N-word. And I know that it's only used in the story from characters you're supposed to hate. And so I understand that, but it was just had enough of even reading the word. Now, about similar to The Stand, but a little bit more, about halfway through this, I was really thinking, this is not what I thought it would be. Not honestly, I thought about just giving up at one point around the middle, but I'm so glad I stuck with it, other than the scene. And the reason I put it on the top, I mean, I didn't talk about complaints with The Stand or The Shining or 11/22/63, but why does it then take the number one spot for Stephen King for me? By the time I finished this book, I missed the Losers Club. I missed those kids. I missed those grown-ups. I felt like they were my friends. I felt like I grew up in Derry with them. There are times when he goes into so much backstory about each character, about the city of Derry. And at times you're like, just get to Pennywise. Let's get the horror and the action going. But I will say that in terms of, if you want to call it world building, character building, this is the best I have read. Like I said, I fully felt like these were my friends. I was right there with them. I felt what they were feeling. I was thinking what they were thinking. And I've never had a book do that to me in that way before, to so make me feel like I was a part of what was taking place. And so, number 2 for the year, It by Stephen King, which leads me to my favorite book of 2021. And I will say at this point in time, as of January 10th, 2022, not only was this my favorite book of 2021, but I will go ahead and say that so far it is my favorite novel of all time. And it also was my favorite movie of 2021, and that is Frank Herbert's Dune. This is just a masterpiece. I don't know what more to say about it. I think to some degree the plot of the story is somewhat familiar to most people. I don't know. I heard some people who saw the movie and it made no sense to them. Probably would have helped to read the books before you saw the movie. But just from the religious elements and the philosophical elements and the political elements, I mean, Frank Herbert takes this extensive passage for pages about a dinner party with all of these political figureheads. And it was fascinating. Just kind of the political maneuvering that's happening, and the betrayals and the backstabbing and the relationships of the characters. This was fantastic. I did read Dune Messiah as well in 2021. Excellent book, nowhere near this. In fact, I would say that of the other 9 books on this list, this was number 1 by a pretty big margin. And it's going to take a lot to see any book in the future surpass this in the number 1 spot. I'm open for it. I would love to see that happen. But as of now, this is solidly fixed as my favorite book of 2021, my favorite book of all time so far. So, those were my top 10 of 2021. Excited about some of the things I'm planning to read this year. A little more intentional about my TBR for this year. Right now, I'm in the middle of a book called Shadow Seer, which is so far so good. It has kind of a fantasy Sherlock Holmes kind of vibe. Also, an audiobook going through The Man in the Black Suit. 4 stories together by Stephen King. So far, so good on that. So, lots of great things I'm looking forward to getting to in 2022. And I do want to stop back here more often to touch base with you guys and anyone who'd want to interact. So, what was your favorite book of 2021? As I said, mine was Dune. What was your favorite? I could make a video of my least favorites. There were only a couple books that I didn't like at all. I just want to focus on the positive. So let me know down in the comments, what was your favorite book of 2021? What's the book you're most looking forward to reading here in 2022? So thank you so much for your patience. It's been a little while since my last video, but thank you for coming back. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. If you like the video, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. I would love to get more voices in on this community and talk about books. I'm really excited for this coming year. So I hope that you had a wonderful holiday season and a great new year, and I hope that your new year is off to a great start. So we'll see you next time. Bye.